Today on Hub Hits, we're diving into the recent confab of the premiers and Prime Minister Mark Carney. All about internal trade. Can we bring those barriers down and kickstart the Canadian economy as it comes under the threat of Trump tariffs? To help unpack it all, we're joined by Speer, editor-at-large, co-founder of The Hub. Hey, Sean, great to be in connection with you today.
Yeah, you too, Rudyard. There a lot of goodwill going into yesterday's meeting, and so it's great to catch up and talk about what precisely the Prime Minister talked about with or discussed with the premiers.
Yeah, so let's go to where the rubber hits the road. I mean, what's your sense, Sean, of what's come out of this? Some progress, my sense, yes, but maybe not as comprehensive, maybe not as much, I don't know, energy here on the part of the premiers to really dig deep and think about all those special interests and other kind of barriers that impede trade inside Canada.
Yeah, I promise I'll answer that directly, Rudyard. But it is worth saying that there is something funny, isn't there, Rudyard, about how we need Ottawa to pull together a meeting of the premiers to essentially use carrots and sticks to get them to stop doing things that are harmful, oftentimes to themselves. A lot of the issues facing Canada are rooted in provincial and local policy decisions that make it hard to invest or work or build in different parts of the country. And one would think that a provincial leader's own self-interest would cause him or her to want to remove those impediments to economic growth and opportunity in their provinces. But of course, that hasn't worked. They persist for a reason. And you get the sense that Mark Carney, using a combination of, as I say, carrots and sticks and maybe some good old-fashioned charm, is trying to get provincial leaders to really get at the heart of some of those issues. The question, of course, is, as you say, is if they haven't done it yet, what has changed? And I think the Prime Minister is hoping that the threat of Donald Trump may be a catalyst for policy changes that have gone unaddressed in the past. I think there's reason to be skeptical. A lot of those policies are in place, Rudyard, because they're responding to some interest. In the case of housing, it might be particular homeowners or neighborhoods or whatever. In the case of interprovincial trade barriers, it may be because of provincial industry. Or, in effect, this is an exercise in trying to overcome public choice theory. And I don't want to sound cynical, but my sense is public choice tends to win out.
Yeah. So what we seem to be seeing in the early stages of this is some like bilateralism. So you've got, Ontario and Nova Scotia. You have the Western provinces
Yes.
talking together. All good, all positive. But I guess, where's the grand bargain? Where's the big deal? And I wonder, Sean, if carrots don't work, how big a stick could the federal government possibly bring to this to either accelerate this process along or really begin to create that bigger deal? Because at the end of the day, the economic efficiency is going to be because it's, the benefits of free trade and parity across the country in terms of credentials and regulation will be mutual. It will be extended to everyone, regardless of whatever bilateral agreements, these provinces want to strike.
Yeah, this is the subject of a lot of constitutional debate. At the risk of sounding wonky, there are those who argue under Section 91 of the Constitution, the federal government really does have the power to step in and effectively disallow interprovincial trade barriers under the Trade and Commerce Clause, rooted in this notion that Ottawa is responsible for Canada's national economic union. You'll remember, Roger, a few years ago now, maybe a bit longer, there was the famous Supreme Court case involving the New Brunswick gentleman who wanted to purchase alcohol and bring it back. And that decision kind of neutered Ottawa's constitutional ability to really step in and impose itself on this issue of interprovincial trade barriers. And then the consequences, what we saw play out yesterday, using the bully pulpit, moral suasion, maybe more federal transfer payments, but all in the effort to try to persuade provincial premiers to, in a way, overcome that provincialism, the parochialism that makes them more responsive to interests within their own borders, as opposed to this vision of a national economy, which it must be emphasized, Rudyard, is not tangential to the creation of Canada in 1867. It was fundamental. Those listeners and viewers who are history buffs will recall that one of the impetus behind
Yeah.
Confederation was the abrogation of a free trade agreement with the U.S. You know, it sounds familiar, doesn't it? And in response to that, and the threat it represented to Canadian access to the U.S. market, there was a decision we needed to come together as a national economy in order to make sure that we could sell goods from coast to coast. And so that's a long way of saying I think that at this point, Mark Carney is going to have to rely mostly on charm and the high-mindedness of premiers if we're going to see meaningful progress.
Well, talking about the high-mindedness of premiers, the premier of Canada's largest province had something rather odd to say at the conference the last 24 hours. Let's have a listen.
Now the Prime Minister is going to go to work, get the legislation passed, and we'll divvy it up. I described him today as Santa Claus. He's coming, and his sled was full of all sorts of stuff. Now he's taking off back to the North Pole. He's going to sort it out, and then he's going to call us. So, and we're building a short of Santa Claus is my big belly. I got to loan it to him.
Well, here's our dear benighted leader in the province of Ontario equating Mark Carney to Santa Claus. Look, I realize there's a lot of hokum and bunkum in the Ford, political routine at the best of times, so give him a pass on that. But I found that revealing in a way, Sean, because it suggests that the provinces want some carrots and they want some big ones. And I don't know if you as a kid had this tradition in your family, but we would leave things under the Christmas tree for Santa. Sometimes it was a little piece of cake. Carrots could also feature there. So I don't know. Are the premiers sending a not so gentle message to Mr. Carney that if you want us to go along with this, Santa's got to have a big sack, and he's got to come down that chimney before July 1st or whenever Mark Carney is at least going to remove the federal barriers, as he says, legislatively on interprovincial trade, and do something for the province's quid quo pro in return.
Yeah, if you'll permit me, Rudyard, I'm going to go off here for a minute, and then I'd be interested in your reaction. My first answer to you earlier in the conversation, I said there's something kind of peculiar about the federal government having to arrange this meeting to encourage provinces to do what ought to be manifestly in their interests and certainly the interests of their citizens, which is to free up the economy in order for people to invest and build and work and all the rest. And yet here we are. And there's something, Rudyard, in my mind that's kind of, I don't even know the right word, embarrassing. To have these premiers, oftentimes, Rudyard, lamenting federal intrusion into their jurisdiction, claiming that Ottawa doesn't see them as co-equal representatives of the population with their own exclusive constitutional jurisdiction as set out in the Constitution Act. And then on the other hand, oftentimes, Rudyard, effectively insist that Ottawa intrude in their jurisdiction as long as it comes with cash. Right? Like, I think if you would have asked the framers of the Constitution, they would have thought that provincial premiers would be territorial about protecting their interests, protecting their jurisdiction, being the kings of their domain, if I can put it that way. And yet consistently, not just yesterday, but over the past several years, we've seen the premiers not only not resist federal intrusion in their jurisdiction, welcome it as long as they get, essentially paid for it. I think it's really unbecoming. It's a breakdown of a notion of federalism that's rooted in a watertight compartment where Ottawa does what Ottawa is responsible for and premiers do what they're responsible for. Premiers have too often rolled over in exchange for dollars, and we're seeing that play out here. The Santa Claus metaphor, I think, is essentially a rejection of Canadian constitutionalism Even if it was said in jest, I think there's just something fundamentally unbecoming about it.
Yeah, well said. I mean, my contribution to this pylon is that he kind of said the quiet part out loud, which is that that this country runs and operates on the basis not of Ottawa as, the source of our, sovereign power, our purpose as a country should be arguably, our national intent, our national effect. No, instead, what Ottawa is really about, it's about money. And it's about all of us, corporations, individuals, provinces, basically carving up this giant dripping roast that is, the federal deficit each year, that is the bloated debts that that every government of every political stripe has racked up since the great financial crisis in the late 2000s. And I just find it amusing when you get these kind of little glimpses into how the whole thing actually works. Ottawa is a handmaiden to the provinces.
Yes.
It is not a sovereign, a domain of its own authority and power. It is basically a means to other people's ends, and those ends are usually political. And in the case of Doug Ford, they're often a little bit crass. So, Sean, always good to check in. I love these third level, next level discussions that we have to unpack the ephemera of our political politics and machinations in this country for the Hub audience. You only find that here on the Hub. We'll talk again soon.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Hub Hits. If you enjoyed this snippet, please, and you're on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. Click on the little notification bell. You'll get your next Hub Hit delivered to you as soon as we publish it. If you're on our podcast channel, leave us a review. Love your feedback and insights on what you're hearing, and share this podcast with friends and family. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.